All right, welcome to Unit 8, Human Impacts on Aquatic and Terrestrial Pollution. 8.1 has to do with the source of the pollution. It's either a point source or a non-point source. And we've said in the class before, if I can point to it and say, hey, there it is, that's probably point source pollution. I can see a pipe draining something into this water. I could see maybe something coming out of a factory, out of their smokestack. That's something I can point to and say that is the source of the pollution. Maybe there's a company along this river and they're dumping stuff into this water at various places, but that chemical can be traced back to that specific company because they're the only one that uses it. That's a point source pollution. Non-point source is stuff that's hard to tell. Maybe a farmer sprays a pesticide over this field, but you don't know which farmer did it, and it diffuses out and it becomes in the soil and in the water, and it's hard to trace it back to where it came from. A good example of non-point pollution is air pollution. A lot of stuff comes out of people's cars, and some cars get smog checked and they're fine, and other cars have yucky stuff coming out, but it's in the air, and if no one saw it, it's hard to point to it. So it's hard to know what the pollution came from. Okay, so we've talked a lot in the past about this range of tolerance and different pollutants. So again, an organism just wants to maintain its balance, its homeostasis. It wants to be in the zone where it's optimal for it to grow and to reproduce and live its life. And if something changes that, then we have issues that arise. So usually they are abiotic factors, which are things that are not living. Abiotic factors such as pH, such as this temperature. There's a whole bunch of them, so make sure you know a lot of them. We talked about this early on in Unit 2. So this is a little review as well as new stuff. So what happens if this homeostasis is not maintained? Well, then things don't grow as well. We have limited growth. Reproduction doesn't happen as much. We don't have the species propagating and continuing on. There could be physiological stress, and it could cause death in species. So there's a lot of things that could happen if the range of tolerance is altered. And usually this range of tolerance is altered because humans do something to the environment. So that's the human impact. All of the pollutants we put in, all of the ways we don't take care of the ecosystem, tearing things down to make buildings or houses or streets, whatever we're doing, we're affecting that environment, and it's probably throwing their homeostasis off balance. So one classic example are coral reefs. Hopefully you've done the reading you were supposed to do about them. You should be a mini expert in coral reefs. You should know why this color change is happening. What is coral bleaching? What causes it? What are the pros and cons of it? What are the effects? What's going on? So as we get more sediments into the ocean, and you better know what causes those, what causes sediments to get into the ocean. That could be a lot of runoff from the land of sediment. The way we fish, that dragging the bottom, that bottom trawling can scrape these corals up and detach them. The fact that climate change is increasing the temperature of the ocean, we have this range of tolerance issue with the coral reefs, and they can't all tolerate it. With rising temperatures, we also get more carbonic acid, CO2. You should be able to connect this. Carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas, added with the water is going to give us carbonic acid, and that's going to decrease, Miceli, decrease the pH of the ocean and make it more acidic. So ocean acidification is directly related to coral reefs and what's happening over here and that coral bleaching. Oil spills, we did a whole lab on that. We've talked about it. We watched that island disappear. We've seen animals covered in oil and they had to be soaped off with their Dawn dishwasher soap. So carbons or hydrocarbons that are found in oil, that's literally what oil is, can kill organisms. And so just know it can cover their feathers, it can suffocate them, and it makes those little tar balls that sink down to the bottom, and they can kill animals that live on the bottom as well. The oil can then get washed up on the beach, and it can destroy habitats. It can get along the coastline. My dog's having a fit. It can get along the coastline and destroy property, devalue it, affect the fishing industry, the tourism industry. They're all going to decrease because of these oil spills. It smells horrible. It's probably not healthy to inhale it. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and it takes a long time to fix it. And we looked at ways to clean up those oil spills. So remember, we had the skimmer, we had the boom to kind of contain it, and we looked at dispersing it, which doesn't really get rid of it. It just spreads it all out to a less hazardous quantity. And we had those oil soaking pads. So remember all of that. All right, you should know what a dead zone is. A dead zone is a place where there is no, whoa, I did this thing with my pen. I hate that. I don't know how to fix it. Dang it. Okay, no oxygen. And so nothing can live, so it's a dead zone. There's a really great article that's current about the dead zone, so it's in current events right now. Every once in a while, the Gulf of Mexico will have this dead zone happen. So the official term is hypoxia. It's reduced oxygen levels in that aquatic environment. And the reason we get it is nutrient pollution. So that's the nitrogen or the phosphorus, usually from fertilizers. It can be in soaps, phosphate soaps. We've started to not have those, like your laundry detergent, and you wash all your clothes in a phosphate-based soap, and then all that wastewater goes right out to the ocean. So those nutrient pollution is the primary cause of the zones. Excess nutrients running off the land, piped out as wastewater in the rivers and the coast, stimulate overgrowth of algae. It then sinks down and decomposes in the water, and that process consumes oxygen because the BOD will rise and the DO will fall. Biological oxygen demand, because the decomposers are working to process all of that extra nitrogen and phosphorus, and the dissolved oxygen is leaving the water because all those decomposers are using it. They're exercising to decompose stuff, and there's no more oxygen in the water, so the other aquatic marine life aren't able to get the oxygen. So that starts a big thing similar to eutrophication, but it's bigger. It's in the ocean, and it is lots of fish will roll up. The water will turn red because of all the extra algae. Sometimes it's called the Red Sea, the red tide, and it becomes toxic. And then the shrimp in the waters that people would normally catch are inedible because there's too high of levels of toxins inside them. And so the whole industry is affected economically as well as environmentally along that Gulf Coast. So here's what it looks like. And this is bottom water area of hypoxia. Make sure you know how to read a graph. What's the title telling you? What are the axes telling you? So this is the area, and this is the year down here. I don't know why we didn't have data down here, but we didn't. Okay, so we can see that there's different times of different years. There's more area that are hypoxic, and there's times where it's less hypoxic. It's kind of interesting. You can see how much oxygen is here. So when it's yellow, that's good levels of oxygen. And when it's the darkest red, those are the lower levels of oxygen or almost no oxygen. All right, so there's an important thing called an oxygen sag curve, and you need to know it. Our old textbook had this picture and our new one does not. So you definitely should put this in your important notebook to study and know it is on the test at times. So here's how you read it. The oxygen sag curve tells us that when the blue line, the dissolved oxygen, is high, and the red line, the biological oxygen demand, is low, we have a healthy environment. So this is healthy. And so animals in the water need oxygen and are using it, and there's a lot there, and they're not overusing it, so it's a pretty balanced amount. So something happens, the decomposition zone, decomposers, maybe a fish dies, some sediment comes in, some pollution comes with a lot of nitrogen or phosphorus. The decomposers get busy. They are processing this. So when something's really busy, it's using more energy and it's demanding more oxygen. So oxygen levels here start to fall because the demand for the oxygen is starting to rise because they're decomposing all this extra nutrient that is coming into the water system. After time, we get an anaerobic area where there's not very much oxygen here. And so we get a septic zone where everything's dying and lacking oxygen. So everything starts to die. As things die, the demand for oxygen starts to lower because nothing's alive to demand the oxygen. And the dissolved oxygen starts to rise. And then we start to recover. And then over time, you can see this curve becomes normal like it was before. So you need to know what's happening in this sag curve. Why is the oxygen sagging? Because stuff's using it. The decomposers are starting to use it because extra nutrient pollution has been added into this water system. All right, we watched lead through the lens of Flint, Michigan. So heavy metals in drinking water are bad. They come from things like industry, mining, and burning fossil fuels. They can naturally come from something like a volcano or a natural fire as well. But usually when nature contributes these things, it's in smaller, more manageable quantities than when man does it. All right, so the big ones, lead, we have talked about that a lot. So you need to know the health effects of all of these. What can happen if it's in your drinking water, and where does it probably come from? So here's a nice graphic to kind of know those things. Lead can be in the pipes, in metal plating. It used to be in our gasoline. We know that from the air unit. We don't put leaded gas anymore. Mercury is naturally occurring in volcanoes. It's in the soil, but we also just learned that whole methyl mercury debacle. So make sure you read that article and are able to talk to me about that. Then there's cadmium, arsenic, copper, and chromium. Usually on the test, it's about lead and it's about mercury. So if you're only going to spend time on two, know those two. Our trash. We litter. We've seen these plastics. This is in a bird's stomach. Look at all those plastic pieces, which means it's not getting any nutrition because it feels like it's full, but the plastic never processes or comes out. These 6-pack rings for sodas and beers get stuck in animals' heads and they can't move. This is netting, fish netting. So there are toxins in these plastics. We have talked about it a lot in class. So make sure you know what an endocrine disruptor is. And make sure you know what happens, and make sure you're aware of the danger of plastics and that relationship. So there is a app called Literati, and it's an app where you can pick up plastic and they actually track the data and they will say, oh, there was 50 pounds of plastic picked up in Anaheim, or 20 pieces of glass, or some paper, and it's kind of cool contributions. So if you want to get that app and show me you've contributed stuff, I'll give you extra credit. Secret extra credit if you watch my video. All right. The plastic thing. So plastics have a lot of chemicals in them. They do originate from petroleum, so oil that we've drilled out. Phthalates have this hormone disruption, reproductive harm in male children. PVCs I have a link to Cancer. The way I remember that is the C here goes to Cancer. Biphenyl, I forgot, bisphenol, I forgot what the A is. Oh my gosh, it's vacation day. BPAs and BPSs are also hormone disruptors. Breast cancer connections start triggering the early onset of puberty and can cause infertility. So there's a lot of consequences in these plastics. I don't know why we keep using them. I don't know why we all think it's okay to drink out of them. It's not. New fact as of this weekend, 88% of all humans have microplastics in their blood system when they tested it. All right, increased sediment. So that is a human impact. We make more sediment spill into these waterways. It affects how light can infiltrate into the water. It affects primary producers, the algae, the planktons, the plants. Predators can't see through this murky water. It affects the entire kind of food web going on because of this increased sediment. So why do we have all that runoff? Well, that's from our other unit. We don't have as many trees or rooted plants. We've cleared off landscapes. The riparian areas are bare. So plants and their roots and the types of soil are all things that can absorb sediment and keep it from running off. But when we clear it out, human impact, it goes away. And now we've entered it all into this water system. All right, we talked about different kinds of lakes. An oligotrophic lake is a nice, young, deep lake. It's cold. Colder water holds more gases. So there's going to hold a whole bunch more oxygen than warmer water. And that's a big deal. So that makes our dissolved oxygen levels low here and our dissolved oxygen levels high here, just because of the temperature. Okay, and you can read here all the traits of these two types of lakes. All right, we looked at these lakes. You need to be able to interpret a data table. This is from an FRQ. You need to know what's going on. So it says, according to the table, what type of lake has 7 parts per million phosphorus? So you need to look at phosphorus and find 7. So this one and this one, which they're both oligotrophic. So your answer here would be oligotrophic. Based on the table, what is a mesotrophic lake? Well, here it is. So it is a middle-aged lake. This is a young lake. This is an old lake. So this is kind of a middle lake, a mid-aged lake. And you could, because this is an FRQ, you would look at a mesotrophic lake and you would say between 10 to 30 parts per million of phosphorus. You would also say 3 to 8 parts per million of chlorophyll. You would just describe what's in this table. And between 2.5 or 2 to 5 meters of transparency or visibility. You could see in that lake 2 to 5 meters away. So you would give a description of all the things going on in this mesotrophic lake. Which lake is youngest? Oligotrophic. Which one produces more oxygen? Well, I don't know. It's going to be the young one, the oligotrophic lake, because it can cold water can hold more oxygen. All right. Which lake has the highest turbidity? Which one's the most murky or cloudy? The eutrophic lake. I'm going to take my answer back. Produces the most oxygen, not holds the most oxygen. Sorry, number 4 would be eutrophic, because if we look over here, they're making more chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is where oxygen is produced. Sorry. See, even I screw up. Eutrophic. So produces more, not holds more. Sorry. Eek. Okay, the methylmercury thing. So we have this mercury. Mercury is an element. It exists. We can't do anything about it. It does combust fine when it gets into bacteria, and then bacteria convert it into this methyl mercury, and it is not so great. It absorbs really well into organisms. It's soluble in fat, so it goes right in, and muscle, and it stores there. It can move through different kinds of cells. That whole barrier of the cell, it doesn't care. It just goes straight in. It can just like whoosh, be soluble in it. Your brain has a lot of fat in it, and so your brain can be highly affected from mercury poisoning. And it does work up at the food chain, the food web, so it'll accumulate and then magnify. Fish get it a lot because mercury gets into the water cycle really easily, and all water leads to the ocean. So it can get thrown up into the air by a volcano. It can get up into the air through factory burning fossil fuels, because remember that coal is in the dirt, and the coal is going to have mercury, if you remember from that mining unit. See, it's all connected. So once this mercury gets into the atmosphere, it will deposit. It will come down. It is a particle. It's going to eventually come down. It will be carried through the air currents. And since 3/4 of our planet touches water, it has high likeliness of landing in water. And then the bacteria process it, and it methylates, and we get this MEHG. Me is just for methylation right here, this methyl mercury. So once that happens, it gets inside the fish, and we do that whole magnification up to the bigger fish. We eat the fish. Lots of stuff is made from fish. So it gets into our whole system, and it's a big, big problem. Okay, so those are the human impacts overview. That's a big, big section. So make sure you study it and read in the chapter about it. It's probably one of the biggest, most important things we have in Unit 8. And I'll see you next time.